Over 100 years ago, science and technology reached a very high level, and humans finally mastered space teleportation. Shockingly, when they tried to teleport, they discovered that they were neither sent back to the past nor to the future. They didn't even travel from one planet to another. Instead, a completely different world lay at the other end of the space teleport channel. A world unimaginable to human beings. In this world, all scientific and technological means lost their function. A machine gun was not even as useful as a steel knife. Missiles and nuclear weapons wouldn't explode, becoming mere scrap iron. No mechanical or electronic equipment would work either. All kinds of horrible creatures inhabited this world. Humans, who once stood at the top of the food chain due to their wisdom and technology, fell to the bottom. But when people killed certain relatively weak creatures and ate their flesh, they were surprised to find their bodies changed considerably and evolved quickly in ways science couldn't explain. What made people pleasantly surprised was that, with the body's evolution, their lifespans also increased, which was amazing news for all mankind. In the following century, more and more people entered this world, called God's sanctuary, gradually becoming familiar with its rules, hunting its creatures, and seeing their bodies evolve. The higher the degree of physical evolution, the longer the lifespan. Theoretically, continuous evolution could make it possible to live forever. In this world, science and technology became completely useless. The only things that could help humans were primitive fighting skills. Ancient martial arts, nearly forgotten in modern society, had an unexpected effect here. All kinds of ancient martial arts were redeveloped, and after more than 100 years of development, new martial arts schools were formed and became prominent. In addition to ancient martial arts, God's sanctuary offered another tool to enhance humans, the beast soul. When killing a creature in God's sanctuary, a person had a chance to obtain the beast soul of the creature. Beast souls came in various forms and appearances. Some could be summoned to fight, others appeared as armor or weapons, and some even transformed humans into terrifying monsters, magical birds, or underground-dwelling insects. Neither martial arts nor beast souls had anything to do with Hansen. He could only kill low-level creatures to eat their flesh and evolve, and he was having a difficult time in God's sanctuary. The more meat of low-level creatures he ate, the less effect on his evolution. After 3 months in God's sanctuary, he still couldn't complete a physical evolution. Hansen tried to kill more powerful creatures, but even the weakest primitive creature, the copper-toothed beast, almost took his life. He had to rest for nearly a month before returning to God's sanctuary. By then, he had eaten all kinds of ordinary creatures around him, and it wouldn't help to eat their flesh anymore. Without risking hunting more advanced creatures, he would never evolve. When he was about to try killing a copper-toothed beast, Hansen saw something climbing out from the ripples of the creek. At first, he thought it was a black beetle but immediately noticed something different. All black beetles had black shells, but a bright golden color caught his eye. Hansen gazed at the creature climbing out of the water. It was indeed a black beetle, but different from the ordinary ones because of its golden body, as big as a basketball, like a sculpture carved from gold. Its eyes were crystal clear like gems. It didn't even look like a living thing unless observed carefully. Why is this black beetle so strange? Hansen stared at the golden black beetle. Recently, he had killed countless black beetles and knew everything about them. Their vision was poor, but their hearing was very sensitive. As long as he remained still, even in close proximity, a black beetle wouldn't notice his presence. Hansen stared at the strange beetle, and unexpectedly, it climbed toward him without hesitation. When the golden black beetle crawled next to Hansen, he held down its shell with one hand and swiftly cut into its fragile joints with the dagger in his other hand. He made 6 clean cuts, vertically and horizontally, to remove all 6 claws of the beetle. The golden black beetle struggled and flipped over. Taking this opportunity, Hansen pierced his dagger into a white mark on its belly and twisted sharply. The golden black beetle suddenly stopped moving. Sacred blood creature black beetle killed. Sacred blood beast soul gained. Eat the flesh of the sacred blood black beetle to gain 0 to 10 geno points randomly, the voice announced in Hansen's mind. He was stunned by the sudden voice and could hardly believe it. Sacred blood creature and sacred blood beast soul, were those even real? The creatures of God's sanctuary were divided into 4 types. Ordinary creatures, primitive creatures, mutant creatures, and sacred blood creatures. Different geno points could be gained by eating the flesh of different creatures. At that time, 4 gods' sanctuary phases were known to men. With each physical evolution completed, access to the next space would be permitted. The more powerful the geno points used in evolution, the higher the likelihood of surviving in the next space. Sacred bloodbeast souls were undoubtedly the best. Any sacred bloodbeast soul could be sold at an enormous price. When Hansen finally realized what had happened, he was almost trembling. Holding the dagger, he picked open the shell of the black beetle and filled his mouth with the jelly-like tender meat. Flesh of black beetle eaten. 1 sacred geno point gained, the voice repeated. He felt on top of the world. He had gained a total of 7 sacred geno points, beyond his wildest dreams. With his background, he needed to risk everything just to kill a primitive creature, let alone a sacred blood creature. The shell of the sacred blood black beetle was also a precious material. Hansen picked up all the claws and shells, stuffing them into his pocket. He knew he could probably afford a nice private aircraft in the Leo Interstellar Alliance with the money from selling the shell. On his way back to Steel Armor Castle, everyone pointed at him, gloating and laughing, avoiding him. In the entire sanctuary, no one was willing or had the courage to associate with Hansen. More than 3 months ago, Hansen had entered God's sanctuary for the first time. The moment he stepped outside the steel armor shelter, he saw a giant white wolf unicorn standing with its back toward him around the corner of the rampart. Without hesitation, Hansen grabbed his dagger and fiercely stabbed the unicorn. That stab turned Hansen into the biggest laughing stock in steel armor shelter. The white wolf unicorn was not a beast but a human like Hansen, who was just transforming using a beast soul. King Chuan was also the most powerful woman in steel armor shelter. She was likely to finish her first evolution with sacred geno points and embark on the path of evolution. A new guy stabbing King Chuan's rear end became the biggest joke in steel armor shelter. Although no one dared to mention this to her face, secretly, everyone was laughing. Ass Freak became Hansen's well-known nickname. King Chuan declared that whoever spent time with Hansen would become her enemy. Few people could afford to be King Chuan's enemy. Even if they could, no one would risk antagonizing her for the sake of a nobody and ass freak. Despite his difficult time, Hansen didn't really blame King Chuan. It was his fault in the first place. He was too nervous the first time he came to God's sanctuary. Plus, he had never seen creatures or transformers before, which led to his unforgivable mistake. He was already grateful that King Chuan didn't kill him in anger. The only fortunate thing was that teleportation into God's sanctuary was always random, so there were no familiar faces in steel armor shelter, and no one knew his real name. Hansen returned to his room, made a fire, and started boiling the black beetle claws and shells in a pot. Without proper tools and know-how, he could only use primitive methods to process the shells and extract the geno essence. The shell of a sacred blood creature would take more than an hour or 2 to cook. So Hansen covered the lid and took out the black crystal to take a closer look. Suddenly, Hansen caught a glimpse of the caged green-scaled beast, the size of a cat, in the corner of his room. It gave him an idea. The green-scaled beast was an ordinary creature. Hansen used to hunt them and bring them back to cook and eat to increase his geno points. But later, green-scaled beasts no longer increased his geno points, so he didn't eat the last one and forgot about it. Surprisingly, it was still alive. He grabbed the moribund green-scaled beast from the cage, hesitated for a moment, and was about to feed the black crystal to it. To his surprise, the dying beast gathered all its strength, stretched out its tongue, rolled the black crystal back into its mouth, and swallowed it whole. There is indeed something magical about the black crystal, Hansen thought. The green-scaled beast seemed considerably more lively after swallowing the crystal. Its 4 claws scratched, and its head moved to bite Hansen's hand, which was on its neck. Hansen threw the beast back into the cage and carefully watched it. The beast, which hadn't fed for days, completely recovered its vitality, thrashing and scratching wildly in the cage, just like when it was first caught. Hansen sat across from the cage and watched the green-scaled beast's movements. He had a guess, and if he was right, he might have obtained something incredible, something even more exciting than a sacred blood creature. But Hansen was afraid he might be wrong. So he anxiously watched the green-scaled beast, hoping for the desired change. Suddenly, Hansen heard iron breaking from the cage, He quickly turned around and saw that the green-scaled beast had bitten off an iron bar of the cage and stretched its head out. Its light green scales had now completely turned dark green, its teeth had become sharp, and the tips of its 4 claws were like iron hooks. The beast was about to escape. Hansen was pleasantly surprised. He pulled out the dagger from his waist, rushed to the front of the cage, and stabbed the dagger into the lower belly of the green-scaled beast. With a turn of the dagger, the green-scaled beast stopped struggling. Primitive creature green-scaled beast killed. No beast soul gained. Eat the flesh of the primitive green-scaled beast to gain 0 to 10 points randomly, the strange voice sounded in Hansen's mind, leaving him stunned. So the crystal can really make these creatures evolve, Hansen thought, overwhelmed with joy. He didn't know how to react. After a long time, he suddenly cut open the green-scaled beast with the dagger and uncovered the crystal, as big as a pigeon egg. Taking no heed of the blood on it, he kissed the crystal twice and wiped it clean, holding it like a great treasure. This crystal was really the reason the black beetle became a sacred blood creature. If the green-scaled beast had continued to evolve, could it have become a sacred blood creature too? Hansen almost dared not think about it because it was too amazing. He was so excited that his hands trembled while holding the crystal. He bit his tongue and cried out in pain to confirm it wasn't a dream. After remaining excited for quite a while, Hansen carefully put the crystal away, gobbled up the shell broth, and gained another sacred Geno point, bringing his count to 8. Hansen realized he had gained a sacred blood beast soul of a black beetle when he killed the golden black beetle. He quickly accessed his profile. Hansen not evolved. Status: none. Lifespan: 200 years. Requirements for evolution: 100 Geno points. Geno points gained: 79. Sacred Geno points: 8. Beast soul gained: sacred blood black beetle, the data showed. He wondered what the armor of the sacred blood black beetle's beast soul would look like. Before he finished the thought, a golden shadow shot out of thin air, looking exactly like the golden black beetle. It flew to Hansen's chest, turned into a golden liquid, and started covering his whole body. In the blink of an eye, Hansen's whole body, together with his hair, was wrapped up. The streamlined gold armor was full of power and impact, covering his entire body as if it were a suit of Gothic medieval armor instilled with improved aerodynamics. It looked like a piece of art. The armor felt powerful and light, making Hansen look slender and majestic, as if his whole body were full of explosive power with a shining metallic luster. The armor was gorgeous and had a solid texture. At first glance, it even resembled the gold cloth worn by golden saints. However, unlike the gold cloth, the beast soul armor covered the head and body completely, with only a few gaps in the joints where different pieces overlapped, similar to the black beetle itself, which was the only weakness of the armor. Hansen moved around in the armor. There was no feeling of heaviness or clumsiness. Instead, he felt that his body had become lighter and full of energy. Indeed, this was armor from a sacred blood beast soul. It's way more gorgeous than the ones from primitive beast souls I've seen at Steel Armor Shelter, Hansen thought, ecstatic. He used to envy people in primitive beast soul armor and never imagined he would get a suit of sacred blood beast soul armor one day. Group President Xiao Yang completed the 3rd evolution, entered the 4th God's Sanctuary, and became the 83rd human in history to do so. His lifespan reached 500 years, and he gained the status of demigod. The prodigy from Rycode Galaxy, L, entered the 2nd God's Sanctuary with 100 mutation Geno points. His lifespan reached 300 years, and he gained the status of evolver. The Speaker of the House of Representatives, Hemingway, killed a demigod creature, Star of the Ocean, yesterday, becoming the first to accomplish this feat. According to authoritative experts, within 10 years, someone will complete the 4th evolution and advance into the 5th God's Sanctuary for the first time. Hansen had just teleported from Steel Armor Shelter, and the news played on a virtual screen. Evolver, Surpasser, and Demigod. With the black crystal, I'll be able to do all that and go even farther, Hansen thought, shaking his fist. He stepped away from the teleport station and took the maglev train home. Before he entered the yard, he heard a harsh female voice. Luo Sulan, do you want to take the old house of the Hans? This house belonged to our parents, and my 2 elder brothers and I share it. Now that my eldest brother has passed, we won't bully you since you are a widow. We'll leave you his share, but if you want to take everything, we'll never agree. That's right, a middle-aged man's voice chimed in. The old house has always been our parents' inheritance. We all have rights to it, and you can't keep it for yourself. Your family has lived here for more than 20 years, so you've already taken advantage of us. It's time to divide the inheritance, my brother said. You've lived in the old house for more than 20 years. We won't collect rent, but this old house is our inheritance and has to be divided, continued a soft-pitched male voice. A young woman's voice added, we have an estimate from a lawyer. This old house is now worth more than 3 million. We are 3 households, so we should get 1 million each. You can either give each of us 1 million and own this old house outright, or sell the house, and then we all split the money. We are okay with either option you choose. Exactly, the harsh first voice began again. Now that our eldest brother is gone, we won't bully his widow and kids. You can give us money or sell the house as you like. Brother and sister, there is no need to force me. You know our situation. We don't have 2 million, a woman said sadly. Then put the house up for sale, the harsh woman immediately said. Where would we live without a house? Hansen just graduated, and Hanan is about to go to school, the sad woman replied. Sister-in-law, this is not reasonable. How are you the only one with troubles? Your kids, Hansen and Hanan, are only enrolled in integrated compulsory education, while my Hanhao goes to a private school. His tuition gives me gray hair every year, another voice chimed in. Sister, you are right. We are all having a hard time, and everyone needs money. Why don't we just sell the house? We could all take some, and you could afford Hanan's education, said the effeminate voice. Anyway, you either give us money or sell the house. Your choice, the young woman said coldly. Outside the house, Hansen became furious as he listened. He pushed the door open and saw his mother shedding tears while holding his sister Hanan. The 5-year-old girl curled up in her mother's arms, her big eyes full of fear. Next to them, 2 men and 2 women stood, smiling indifferently. How dare you come here and ask for the old house? Hansen pointed to the fierce-looking fat woman and exclaimed in anger. Aunt, you used to be an accountant in the company and brought about tens of millions in bad debts. Did my dad not help you after you begged him? Hansen, what nonsense. Who caused bad debts? Stop lying. The skinny guy with the effeminate voice cried, pointing at Hansen. Uncle, you embezzled the company's public funds to invest and lost a few million. Hansen pointed to the skinny guy. Did you not come to my home and get on your knees to beg my dad for help? And you, uncle, you owed so many gambling debts that you were almost forced to commit suicide. Who helped you when you were almost beaten to death? Who saved your life? Hansen pointed to the fat middle-aged man. Star Group wanted to acquire our family business. If my dad didn't represent all of you and then had a falling out with Star Group, would he have died in such a shady way? Hansen clenched his teeth, looking at the 4. But you skipped my dad's funeral and sold the company to Star Group upon his death. Did you give us any of the money you got from selling the company? Also, who paid for your houses when you got married? Were those houses any cheaper than this old house? Did you take care of your parents for a single day when they were alive? How dare you come here to ask for a share of the old house? Stop it. Your father only did what he wanted to do. The company belonged to my father, and we all have shares. He can't decide for us, and surely we can spend the company's money, Uncle Hanley said brazenly. That's true. Your father was a dictator, and we are only getting our own money back, they started accusing Hansen's late father. Hansen was shaking with anger and felt wronged for his father. When his father took over the company, it was only a small business worth 1 or 2 million. He spent so much effort for the company to bloom and had to look after his family and make up for their mistakes. A few times, the company was on the brink of bankruptcy due to liquidity problems, and he even died for the company. After his death, however, his wife and children were bullied by the relatives he used to help. When Hansen's father was alive, he always said that they were family, and there's no need to argue. What an irony it had become now. If they truly needed the money and had difficulties, Hansen would just agree to give it. But all the private aircraft they piloted here were worth more than 1 million, and they at least got 10 million from selling the company, which all fell into their pockets. Nothing was given to Hansen's family. It was simply impossible that they didn't even have 1 million. After making a fuss at Hansen's home, Hannum and Hanley gave his family an ultimatum. They had to come up with the money or sell the house in 1 month. Otherwise, they would file a lawsuit. I'm so useless that I can't even keep the house. Luo Sulin held Hainan, her face covered with tears. Luo Sulin was a gentle lady. When Hansen's father was still alive, she was treated like a princess. She didn't even know how to sweep the floor, let alone do other chores. Hansen knew how difficult it was for her to raise his sister and him after his father passed away. Don't worry, Mom. I am here. Even though Dad isn't, I will not let them take away our house. You take a rest, and I'll consult Uncle Jiang on the matter. Hansen called a friend of his father's, Mr. Jiang, who was a lawyer and used to work in their family business as legal counsel. Hi, Uncle Jiang. This is Senator. Is your back any better? I have a legal matter that I want to ask you about, Hansen said. Hansen looked pale when he hung up. He had confirmed that his relatives told the truth. They do have rights to a part of the house, and if they really did go to court, the verdict would be close to what they'd asked for. To either pay them money or sell the house. Sen, what did Mr. Jiang say? Luo Sulin asked, looking at him nervously. Don't you worry, Mom. I have checked with Uncle Jiang, and there is a solution. You just make sure Yan is okay, and I'll take care of this. Our house will not be taken away by anyone, Hansen said with a smile. That's good, that's great, Luo Sulin breathed a sigh of relief. Now, Hansen had no power or influence. The only solution was to come up with $2 million in a month if he wanted to keep the house. Although he felt it was unfair, without power, there was nothing left to do. $2 million Leo dollars was an enormous amount for a young man who had just finished integrated compulsory education. In the past, Hansen couldn't have earned $2 million in a year, let alone in a month. But now, everything was different. In fact, if he had not already cooked the shell of the sacred blood black beetle, the shell alone would be worth $1 or $2 million. Even without the shell, he still had the black crystal that could make creatures evolve. As long as he had that, $2 million was nothing. He must first catch a creature before he could use the crystal to make it evolve and trade the flesh of the evolved creature for money. Now that Hansen owned a suit of sacred blood beast soul armor, he could up his game and start to hunt primitive creatures instead of ordinary ones. Primitive creatures weren't worth much, and he would waste a day's time waiting for an ordinary creature to evolve into a primitive one. To come up with $2 million, Hansen would need to sell at least a mutant creature. Primitive creatures were usually seen a dozen kilometers from steel armor shelter. Hansen had not dared to go that far before, but now he had his armor. This time, his goal was no longer a copper-tooth beast, the weakest among all primitive creatures, but the swift manes often spotted in Zephyr Valley. Although a primitive creature, a swift manes had a fragile body and could easily be killed by a normal alloy dagger if stabbed in a vulnerable spot. However, a swift manes was so fast that ordinary people couldn't keep up with it, and its pair of hacksaw-like forelegs could easily split human bones. Once hit by the forelegs, a person would be crippled if not killed. Few humans would go to hunt this creature. For Hansen, however, the swift manes was the best option. In the end, it was only a primitive creature, and there was no way it could cut open his sacred blood beast soul armor. If he couldn't be hurt by the manes, surely he could kill it. The most important thing was that with its claws and wings cut off, a swift manes could no longer fight back but could still live. This way, Hansen could easily take it back, keep it in his room, and use the black crystal to make it evolve into a mutant creature before he sold its flesh. Of course, if he were able to kill a few swift manes and got lucky, he might even gain a beast soul. The beast soul of a swift manes was in the shape of a swift jagged blade, which was a long dagger, a type of weapon Hansen had mastered. Although the swift jagged blade was only a primitive beast soul weapon, it was the sharpest of all primitive weapons and could even compare to some mutant beast soul weapons. Due to the danger of hunting swift manes, few would go to Zephyr Valley, and even fewer had obtained a swift jagged blade. If the rare weapon were to be sold, it would cost more than $2 million. So, if Hansen could score a beast soul of a swift manes, there would be no need to sell mutant creature flesh anymore. The closer Hansen got to Zephyr Valley, the fewer people he saw around. There was no human activity at all. Hansen did not dare to go too deep, so he found a hidden place and summoned the sacred blood black beetle beast soul to cover himself in the golden armor. Taking a deep breath, he sneaked toward Zephyr Valley. Hansen did not dare to move too fast. The valley was covered with trees and wild grass as tall as a man. As the trees and grass swung with the wind, it was difficult to spot any swift manes that might be hiding there. Even momentary carelessness could lead to broken bones from a mane's attack. Suddenly, Hansen saw something green, about a foot long, sticking to the grass like a leaf. If he hadn't looked closely, he would have thought it was part of the grass and would never have imagined it to be a swift manes that could split a human skull with a single blow. Its pair of sickle-like jagged forelegs were even longer than its body, dark green in color. The forelegs were covered in a metallic sheen and were nothing like its fragile body. The rigidity of the forelegs was definitely comparable to the most advanced alpha alloy. Hansen was lucky to have found the swift manes before it saw him. Moving toward it, he calculated the nearest he could get before being noticed by the swift manes. When he was about 6 feet away, Hansen did not dare to go any farther, fearing he might lose the opportunity to attack by stealth. Tightly holding the dagger in his hand, Hansen rushed out from the grass and cut at the swift mane's waist in a fast and ruthless strike. But Hansen had underestimated the speed and responsiveness of the swift manes. It noticed his presence the moment he rushed out. Suddenly, it rose into the air, gliding with wings spread toward Hansen in a truly swift move. Its forelegs slashed at his head before he could even react. Hansen subconsciously stepped back in shock, yet the mane's forelegs still hit his head with a sound of metal clashing. He felt only slight discomfort, as if his head were hit by a stone. There wasn't even a scratch on the sacred blood beast soul armor. Filled with ecstasy, Hansen seized the opportunity to cut into the slim waist of the swift manes in front of him with a fierce stab. The swift manes was cut into 2 halves, its green blood splashing all over him. Hansen didn't care at all and listened blissfully to the strange voice in his head. Primitive creature swift manes killed. No beast soul gained. Eat the swift manes to gain 0 to 10 primitive geno points randomly, the voice echoed. Touching his helmet where the swift manes had slashed, Hansen felt it was still smooth. He thought to himself in excitement, haha, the armor is everything. With my armor, I could kill whatever I want to kill, and no one could ever hurt me. I wouldn't even fear mutant creatures. Suddenly gaining courage, Hansen stopped hiding. He marched into Zephyr Valley and alerted several swift manes to attack. But they couldn't hurt him at all due to his armor. Hansen took the opportunity to kill them all, each with 1 stab. Primitive creature swift manes killed. No beast soul gained. Eat the swift manes to gain 0 to 10 points randomly, the voice continuously sounded in his mind, adding to his thrill. He stabbed his way through the valley, killing more than 20 manes in succession. Suya was on his way to Zephyr Valley as well, quietly mulling over his own bad luck. His parents were the owners of an interstellar conglomerate and were considered both distinguished and aristocrats. However, he was randomly assigned to Steel Armor Shelter, where he had no friends or even acquaintances. To gain an aristocratic title, Suya could only choose to follow King Chuan to max out on mutant geno points and become an evolver. There were 2 types of titles in the Leo Interstellar Alliance. One was distinguished. Once one became a surpasser, one could be certified as distinguished. The other was aristocratic. If one could evolve with 100 mutant or more advanced geno points, one could be certified as an aristocrat. Either title involved numerous benefits in the alliance and, most importantly, symbolized social status. In today's alliance, people had become increasingly snobbish. Upper-class individuals wouldn't even talk to someone without a title, not even for business. Advanced titles like Sacred Blood Aristocrat were beyond Suya's dreams. All he wanted was to gain the title of Ordinary Aristocrat by maxing out on mutant geno points and completing an evolution. However, obtaining 100 mutant geno points was still too difficult for him on his own. He had brought a lot of money to Steel Armor Shelter, but money could only buy ordinary and primitive creature flesh, as very few people would sell mutant creatures. Only people aiming to max out on sacred geno points, like King Chuan, would sometimes sell mutant creature flesh. However, it wasn't money King Chuan wanted, but loyalty and service. Suya was now running errands for King Chuan, exploring places less known to people and searching for traces of sacred blood and mutant creatures to gather information for her. With the information, she could then gather a team to hunt these creatures, and the team members would get mutant creature flesh in return. Suya had been exploring for a month and found no traces of mutant creatures, let alone sacred blood ones. Running out of supplies, he had to return to Steel Armor Shelter. When he passed Zephyr Valley, he thought there might be mutant creatures around, as the area was so sparsely populated. After sneaking into the valley, he felt something strange. He didn't see any swift manes, not even one. A mile into the valley, all he saw were some messy traces on the ground. Someone must have wiped out the swift manes, Suya thought. Surprised, Suya sped into the valley, wondering what had happened. As he expected, there were many green bloodstains from swift manes along the way. He followed the bloodstains and turned a corner. What he saw stopped him in his tracks, appalled. Next to the piled bodies of swift manes stood a golden figure in the sun. The figure looked like a robot in gold cast armor. Brother, you killed all these swift mantises. Suya saw no one except for the guy in golden armor. The dead mantises were still bleeding, so they couldn't have been dead for long. Zakayo couldn't believe that someone was able to kill so many mantises in such a short amount of time. Although the swift manes was only a primitive creature considering the sharpness of its 4 legs and its speed, even those who had maxed out on primitive geno points didn't dare to provoke it. After all, there were too many weak spots on human body and no one wanted to risk losing his life or getting severely injured from a mantis cut. There were at least 3 dozen dead swift mantises on the ground. Even Ken Chuan would need some helping hands to achieve this. Zy Kiao wouldn't believe that someone could have done it alone once some $1,000 each. Hansen was just considering what to do with the mantises. He was on a killing spree and forgot the fact that there was no way he could eat so much his meat, and even if he could eat them all, only the first few could gain him Geno points 1,000 each. Are you sure? Zyo Keel looked at him, surprised. Although many people were able to hunt primitive creatures, they were in short supply, especially the ones that most people had never eaten like swift mantis. After all, people's energy was limited and there was a limit to how many Geno points the meat from the same type of creature could offer. Zy Sao calculated and figured that he could double or triple the price if he could transport these mantis bodies back. Yes, $1,000 each. Hansen nodded. It wasn't that Hansen did not know what the mantises were worth without a car or other tools. There was simply no way he could move all these bodies back on his own, and if he left now, the bodies might be stolen when he returned. Moreover, Hansen did not want to waste his time and energy on this. He had more important things to do and he could take some loss of the profits as the wholesaler. He had to leave some profit to the retailer. A total of 43, I'll give you a discount and charge only 40,000. Hansen was just casually asking and did not expect this ordinary-looking guy to be so rich that he could buy them all. Suzy Oko took out his wallet and pulled out $10,000 notes rather. I'll give you 50,000 for these mantises. The other 50,000 is a down payment for whatever good stuff you may have in the future. I'll always give you a good price and would pay even higher for mutant creature flesh. If you have mutant creature flesh to sell, do let me know. The price is definitely not a problem. Zyu boasted, afraid that he might lose this great opportunity. Great. What's your name and address? I will come and find you if I have something. Hanan appreciated Zio Kao's generosity and thought he might be an ideal buyer for the mutant creature he planned to produce using the Black Crystal Brother. My name is Suzy Okao and that's my real name. My room number at Steel Armor Shelter is 1046. How about you? What's your name and where do you live? Al said $. That's the only thing I care about. Prepare some money and I'll go to room 1046. Once I have something. Hansen put the money into his pocket, waved goodbye to Zisao and left Zephyr Valley. Having been through his father's death, Hansen did not want to have too many exchanges with others. He just wanted to take care of his mother and sister and do his own thing. Other people or things didn't really affect him. Brother, I'll wait for you. You must come. Remember, the price is definitely not a problem. Suzy Ol shouted at the back of Hansen while waving his hand. After Hansen left, Zakayo couldn't help but call out. How could I get these back? Suzy Ol fought for a while and decided to carry some back in a bag and asked some friends to help him carry the rest. Fortunately, there were almost no humans in Zaor Valley. When Zakayo came back with friends, all the bodies were still there. Zioko. Is it true that Dollar killed all these swift mantises? Suzy Ocao's friends looked wide-eyed at the pile of mantis bodies. Of course, although I did not see him hunting, there was no one else in Zephyr Valley at the time and the mantises had just died. Who else could it be? Zyo Sao said, I think it must be a gang of people that killed these swift mantises and others must have left him to deal with the bodies. I don't believe one person could kill so many mantises. He must be bragging. He was definitely bragging. None of Zyocao's friends believed Hansen killed the swift mantis alone. Hansen didn't go back to Steel Armor Shelter. After leaving Zephyr Valley in a flash, he killed every swift mantis in a frenzy so that there were none left. Well, I'll just go hunt a copper-tooth beast. There are plenty of them near Steel Armor Shelter and there is a high chance of catching a mutant copper-tooth beast. So it wouldn't seem too suspicious if I were to produce a mutant one. Using the crystal, Hansen found a habitat of copper-tooth beasts and wanted to catch one that was alone, only able to find a small group of copper-tooth beasts. Hansen went ahead and killed all of them, but one taking advantage of his tough armor primitive creature. Copper-tooth beast killed no beast. Soul gained. Eat the flesh of copper-tooth beast to gain 0 to 10 primitive geno points. Randomly primitive creature copper-tooth beast killed. Primitive beast soul of copper-tooth beast gained. Hansen's eyes widened in surprise. The 43 swift mantises and thousands of ordinary creatures he had killed didn't render a single beast soul. Now he had killed only 2 copper-tooth beasts and gained a beast soul. To get a beast soul requires pure luck. Hansen was filled with joy, although it was common. The beast soul of a copper-tooth beast was quite nice to have. The copper-tooth beast was one of the weakest among all primitive creatures, but its beast soul was popular. Hansen summoned the new beast soul and a porcupine-like shadow with bronze fangs shifted into a bronze crescent spear in his hand. The crescent spear had a bronzy sheen and a menacing look with its crescent-shaped spearhead. Type of primitive beast soul of copper-tooth beast weapon. Hansen played with the spear for a while looking quite fierce. He was taught basic spear skills at school. Hansen was interested in all kinds of weapons, so he learned well. Hansen put away his spear before he grabbed the living copper-tooth beast and went back. On his way back he found a lonely spot to remove his armor looking like himself again. Hansen went back to Steel Armor Shelter carrying the knocked out and tied up copper-tooth beast on his shoulder. At the gate of the shelter, a gang of about a dozen people were marching out, all riding on different tall beast soul mounts headed by a man wearing steel armor and carrying a blood-red sword on his back. The man was riding a triceratops-like beast soul mount, looking mighty and majestic, attracting envious glances from all around. In Steel Armor Shelter, there are 3 outstanding persons who aim to complete evolution by maxing out on sacred geno points. This man, Son of Heaven, was one of them. Hansen didn't know his real name and identity, but he was definitely a king in Steel Armor Shelter carrying the copper tooth beast. Hansen stepped aside to let the gang pass. However, Son of Heaven stopped his mount when passing by him. Crack! Son of Heaven looked at Hansen and slashed him on the shoulder with a leather whip. The copper-tooth beast fell on the ground and Hansen's clothes were ripped apart. A wound started to swell on his shoulder and back. Who had the nerve to sell you? This primitive creature, Son of Heaven asked in a cold tone, looking down at him condescendingly in Steel Armor Shelter. Everyone knew that Son of Heaven was wooing King Chuan, as freak who stabbed King Chuan in the rear naturally became his enemy. He was also one of the reasons why Hansen was miserable when learning King Chuan was stabbed. Son of Heaven not only had Hansen beaten up, but also let everyone know that whoever would dare to do business with Han would become his enemy for life. I hunted it myself. Hansen stared back, coldly, fist clenched, but standing still. Not only had Son of Heaven gained a lot of geno points, but he also had collected many beast souls. Since he had helped from his gain, Hansen wouldn't be able to touch the guy even with his best effort. Even with his sacred blood armor, he would be beaten to death before he approached Son of Heaven. If I find out that someone dares to sell to you, I'll make sure you both die in pain. Son of Heaven looked around and rode away as freak. Don't make trouble or else I don't mind teaching you another lesson. Hansen watched the gang going away with fire burning in his eyes. He picked up the copper-tooth beast quietly and walked towards Steel Armor Shelter with everyone watching him with derision. Stronger. I need to become stronger, with scorching anger in his chest. Hansen knew he was far too weak to fight the gang on his own. The black crystal, however, was his biggest opportunity. Son of Heaven, just get rid of him for good. Tan Young said coldly. Son of Heaven smiled and said King Chuan is a stubborn girl. She doesn't like people to intervene in her business since she did not kill Hansen. She might be upset if I did. Would an unwise woman, another henchman of Son of Heaven Peerless Sword, said it's her honor that you bro would chase her while she just puts on airs. If it weren't for you, I would have killed her already. Don't put King Shuang down. She's quite something in both God's sanctuary and the Alliance. If she becomes mine, it will be a huge advantage to me. Son of Heaven said grimly. End of discussion. We need to get to Sunset Slope before Fisk Guy is gang. That sacred blood creature has to be ours. Hansen returned to his room, tied the copper-toothed beast to a cage and put the black crystal in front of it. The beast gobbled up the black crystal greedily. After an entire day, Han Hannon noticed some changes to the copper-toothed beast. Its fur had been gray, black like a wild boar, and its fangs had been bronze. Now its fur also started to show a bit of bronze luster and the fangs had become brighter in color. However, this was not a true mutant copper-toothed beast, which ought to look like a bronze statue. Although this one did show some bronze luster, it was still quite different from a mutant one. It seems that the evolution from a primitive creature to a mutant creature is a more complex process than from ordinary to primitive. So it requires more time than one day. Hansen pondered after more than 2 days. Its bronze color thickened, but the copper-toothed beast still didn't look like it was going to evolve anytime soon. Hansen had to let the beast evolve at its own pace and go kill some primitive creatures for money. Plus, he could also use some primitive geno points, even if one didn't choose to use the primitive geno points to complete evolution. The more primitive geno points one gained, the stronger the body would become, and the same went for ordinary and mutant geno points. If one could max out on ordinary, primitive and mutant geno points, one's physical conditions would still be far beyond the average level. Even without evolution with the black cyst, it wouldn't be difficult for Hansen to max out on all 4 types of geno points. At the moment, he wanted to max out on the other 3 before he focused on sacred geno points. Hansen left his room and walked into the shelter feeling slightly different today. The streets seemed to be a lot less crowded than usual. What's going on? Hansen walked past the plaza and found fewer stalls there than usual as well. People there were all whispering something to each other. Hannon listened for a while and started to figure out what had happened. A few days ago, someone had spotted a new sacred blood creature near the Sunset Slope. Somehow the 3 gangs in steel armor shelter all found out about it and gathered at the slope, but the outcome was terrible. The sacred blood creature ran free while a lot of men were killed. Today, King Chuan, Son of Heaven, and Fisk Guy had reached an agreement to hunt the sacred blood creature together. They also recruited a lot of lone wolves in smaller groups, forming the largest campaign in steel armor shelter. In recent years, the 3 gangs were determined to kill this creature. Hansen suddenly had an idea, so he turned around and ran out of the city when there was no one around. He summoned the black beetle beast soul and covered himself in armor. After running for 2 hours, he came to a stone hill west of Sunset Slope. Having finally climbed to the top of the hill, Hansen took a look in the direction of Sunset Slope among thousands of people fighting and yelling. There was a monster with the head of a cow, the upper body of a human and the lower body of a horse. It was holding a double-edged golden axe and pushing its way through the crowd. No one could withstand the fierce blow of its axe. Hansen happened to see the monster swinging the axe at Son of Heaven, who even had his blood-red sword. Son of Heaven did not dare to block the axe. He stepped on his own mount and leapt back a few feet. Roar the monsters. Double-edged axe hit the Triceratops like beast soul mount and split it in 2 halves that broke Son of Heaven's heart. A mutant beast soul mount was very rare with the same value as a small interstellar spaceship. How is this sacred blood creature so strong? Hansen was shocked. The sacred blood creature ran and killed thousands of people in a flash and no one was able to fight back. Even people as strong as King Chuan, Son of Heaven, and Fisk Guy didn't dare to engage in a frontal attack, hit by all sorts of alloy arrows and beast soul arrows. The monster still didn't even get a scratch when it swung the axe. No one could get close. Such a mighty creature corresponded to Hansen's impression of a sacred blood creature. The sacred blood black beetle he killed was way too weak compared to this monster. It was only a little stronger than an ordinary black beetle and didn't even feel like a sacred blood creature. People were expecting to trap the sacred blood creature, but now a key buffer was lost. As the mount of Son of Heaven was killed, the sacred blood creature was charging madly, waving the golden double-edged axe and leaving screams, blood and limbs behind. It took it only moments to rush out of the siege to the mountain at the foot of the mountain. It even smugly turned around and stood on its back legs mooing like a cow before it ran into the mountain it wants to escape. Son of Heaven furiously summoned a green eagle-shaped beast soul, which turned into a green iron bow in his hand. Then he summoned a fiery beast soul in the shape of a giant six-wing wasp as his arrow, seeing the arrow. King Chuan and Fisk Guy exclaimed a sacred blood beast soul of a six-wing wasp. They had joined force with Son of Heaven in hunting the sacred blood six-wing wasp. Son of Heaven was the one who had launched the final blow. I just didn't expect him to be so lucky to have gained its beast soul. There were less than 10 beast souls known to people in the entire steel armor shelter, and many were left by those who already had evolved and gone to Second God's sanctuary. Son of Heaven, it's a beast soul that can only be used once if you failed to kill it. Lu Otan Young wanted to stop him, but it was too late. Son of Heaven had already shot the sacred blood, beast soul arrow with a full draw. The arrow turned into a red lightning bolt flying towards the sacred blood creature. Bang! The sacred blood creature felt the imminent danger and turned around. The wasp arrow shot into its chest and exploded, bursting open its flesh. The monster fell to the ground, losing its vitality as its internal organs and blood sprayed out. How dare you, my mount? There is no way I'd let you live. After doing that, Son of Heaven yelled loftily, standing like a king, leaving everyone in shock. While proud to see the crowd being impressed, including Ken Chuan, Son of Heaven suddenly saw a green shadow shooting down from the sky into the dying sacred blood creature and ended its life. A golden figure immediately rushed from the stonehill nearby and approached the sacred blood creature, lifting the golden double-edged axe to his shoulder. The mysterious figure ran towards the mountain in a flash. Suzanne Okiao recognized Hansen's unique golden armor in no time and called out loud. Hansen was hiding on the stonehill when the sacred blood creature charged in his direction. As he was deciding whether to retreat, he saw Son of Heaven shoot down the sacred blood creature. Anger surged and Hansen rushed down the stonehill. While summoning the bronze crescent spear, he shot the spear at the monster and hit it in the wounded chest, killing the dying creature. Sacred blood. Bloody Slayer killed sacred blood. Be Soul Bloody Slayer gained. Eat the flesh of Bloody Slayer to gain 0 to 10 sacred Geno points. Randomly, the voice in the back of his head brought him intense joy. He had just gained another sacred blood Be Soul. His luck was too good to believe. However, Hansen did not have time to celebrate. The body of the Bloody Slayer was too large for him to take away, but what he could take away was the giant golden axe. The creatures in God's sanctuary could produce certain treasures through special means. People called these treasures gears. Although gears were just like solid items and could not be summoned, like Be Souls, they could perform as well as Be Souls if they were produced by advanced creatures. The Bloody Slayer was peerless when holding the golden axe, and the axe could easily break normal beast soul weapons and Be Soul mounts. So it proved to be an excellent sacred blood gear. Hansen's goal was to get the golden axe and the beast soul of Bloody Slayer was completely unexpected. Loot watching Hansen running on the mountain with the golden axe. Everyone was stunned. Mother of Ashkur, Son of Heaven let out a raging roar when he realized what had happened with a black wild abuse summoned as his mount. He rode madly in Hansen's direction behind him. His gang all raced off on their own mounts to chase Hansen, roaring and rebuking him. Hansen did not expect the golden axe to be so terribly heavy with 8 sacred Geno points. He was already a lot stronger than before, yet he could still barely walk with the axe. Not to mention run, the Bloody Slayer made it seem so light. How could I run off with such a heavy weapon? Hansen looked back and could already see Son of Heaven and his gang only half a mile from him. Although it was too heavy to carry, Hansen would never leave behind such an excellent sacred blood gear. He suddenly thought of his newly gained beast soul of the Bloody Slayer, took a look at it and suddenly cheered up. Type of sacred blood, Bloody Slayers, beast soul, shape shifting without thinking. Hansen summoned the beast soul of Bloody Slayer and a majestic shadow galloped out looking just like the monster, only missing the giant X. The beast's soul ran towards Hansen and was instantly integrated with him. His body was transformed into a Bloody Slayer and the black beetle armor changed its shape accordingly, still fully covering Hansen's body as a Bloody Slayer. After all, beasts' soul armor was not as rigid as man-made ones and could change according to the shape of the body after shape shifting. Hansen felt so energetic that the golden axe was now nothing to him. Running with 4 hoofs, he also became incredibly fast. Hansen surged up the mountain at full speed and disappeared, far outpacing the gang. Everyone was speechless as everything happened so fast. Many smirked as they watched Son of Heaven, and others who were still chasing hands sent as #T. Who was that guy? He's got some nerve jumping into the boiling pot, and what loot in addition to the golden axe. He gained a sacred blood be soul. Can you imagine how much it must be worth? You think you could buy a sacred blood be soul just with money? Haha, Son of Heaven must be so mad. A sacred blood be soul. It would have been his but was taken away. The arrow he used seemed like a one-off sacred blood be soul. And what did he get in return for such investment? Lol, and just afraid Son of Heaven will lose his mind. Didn't expect there to be a sacred blood be soul. How lucky that guy is. He could never have killed the monster alone, and a dozen sacred blood creatures may not even render a single beast soul. It just happened that he gained everything with the last hit. Who was that guy? Indeed. Is there such a person in steel armor shelter? I heard someone call him Doll, but not sure. Doll, interesting name. After less than an hour, Son of Heaven returned gloomy with his gang, but people already knew it was impossible to find someone on the winding mountain trails. Son of Heaven immediately questioned Oko. When he got back, his exclamation dollar had been a mistake. Oko had no choice but to tell him everything about how he met Hanan, which wasn't very helpful since all he had was a name. Son of Heaven didn't fully believe him but couldn't do much as Oko was in Chu's gang. He bitterly led his gang back to steel armor shelter and locked down the shelter, swearing to find Dollar and cut him into pieces. Most people did not learn the name Dollar. While Doll became popular for a while, Doll, Son of Heaven, Sacred Blood Creature and Sacred Blood Beast Soul became the most popular topics in steel armor. Shelter. Hansen was digging a pit at the foot of the mountain, planning to bury the giant golden axe there. Although he escaped the manhunt of Son of Heaven by shapeshifting into the Bloodslayer, there was a limit to how long he could shapeshift. As one of the most powerful beast soul types, shapeshifting, beast souls could directly impart significant changes to a human body, which could be unbearable. For those with weak genes, the stronger the creature one wanted to shapeshift into, the more gen points and bodies were needed. In general, for primitive beast souls, the number of minutes the body could withstand the shapeshifting was equal to the number of primitive geno points gained. No one could see a sacred blood be sold if it wasn't summoned, yet the golden axe could not be turned invisible. The person he mainly had offended was Son of Heaven. Yet the campaign was a joint one, and the axe should have been the mutual gain of all 3 gangs. Hence, Hansen had pissed off all of them and could only bury the axe in that spot for the time being. If I could sell the giant golden axe, it should easily bring at least 2 million. Hansen was still excited after burying the axe. A sacred blood gear was not as valuable as a sacred blood beast soul, but still considered almost priceless. If he could sell it, 2 million would be a small amount. As for the sacred blood beast soul, Hansen had not even thought of selling. This was the bedrock of his survival and success in God's sanctuary, and it would be like Kyle the goose that lays the golden egg if he were to sell it. Returning to steel armor shelter, he saw Luan Young guarding the gate with others. Everyone who tried to enter the shelter was interrogated. Hansen had no fear as he had already buried the golden axe. A young man at the gate stopped him and wanted to do a body search on him. While Luan Young said, "Why waste any time on that scumbag? How is it even possible that he would be $F#cough?" The young man pushed Hanan away and turned to search other people. Hanan looked at Lu Ten Young with a sneer and went into the shelter. Everyone in the street was talking about what had happened at Sunset Slope. Listening to people calling him Doll, Hansen thought, "Damn Oko, who told you to call me Doll?" He was happy to know that Son of Heaven was furious and strode back to his room. In another room, Oko stood in front of King Chuan almost in tears. "Chuan, you need to believe me, I've told you everything I know. I really did not know Doll, but only saw him once in Zephyr Valley and bought some swift mantises from him, which I gave to my bros as gifts. Just ask around. If you don't believe me, they even helped carry the mantises back from the valley. I am not blaming you. I just want you to contact Dollar. Tell him I am willing to buy his sacred blood, be soul and gear, and ask him how much he wants." King Chuan said quietly, "But I really do not know where he is." Suzy Oca said, sadly, "Then go find him." Don't let anyone know about this and go look for him secretly. If you manage the task, I'll reward you." King Chuan showed Suzy Oca out after she gave the order, not waiting for his reply after he left King Shu, and frowned to herself. Who could Dollar be? Is he someone in Fisk Guy's gang, or was the whole thing orchestrated by Son of Heaven? If he really is on his own, can I get him on my side? If I can't, it would also be nice to purchase the sacred blood, be soul and gear almost at the same time. Fisk Guy sent his men to look for Dollar in secret, trying to buy the sacred blood, be soul and gear from him. Although it was a joint, the only one who suffered a loss was Son of Heaven. If it had not been for his sacred blood wasp arrow, the bloody slayer would have run away and there would have been nothing for Chuan and Fisk Guy. Now they could share some flesh of the bloody slayer, so it had gone well for them. However, Son of Heaven lost a mutant beast. Soul mount in a sacred blood was Barrow while being robbed of the sacred blood, beast, soul and gear. Anyone in his place would have been exasperated. The entire steel armor shelter was looking for Dollar, yet no one connected him to. As Freak Son of Heaven also put a price on his head and even offered to pay a reward for any substantive information. The price was so good that even Hannon wanted to offer himself for the reward: primitive green-scaled beast. Flash Eden, one primitive geno point gained. Hand Sen squatted in the bushes watching a deep pond near him while chewing meat jerky made from the green-scaled beast. Up until this point, he had gained 91 ordinary geno points, 26 primitive geno points, 0 mutant geno points, and 8 sacred geno points. The copper-tooth beast was still slowly evolving, so Hansen could only go out to hunt some primitive creatures, hoping to gain more primitive geno points because the black beetle armor would draw too much attention. He could only go deep into the mountains where nobody goes, fearing that Son of Heaven would know where he was. Fortunately, God's sanctuary was so vast that there were many places where humans had never set foot, so it was rather easy for Hansen to disappear. While staring at the deep pond, Hansen suddenly heard a distant voice of a man and immediately tensed up. Soon Hansen saw a young man walking towards the pond in ragged clothes. He was covered with cuts and bruises all over and looked extremely tired. "Friend, there are iron-toothed crocodiles in the pool." Hansen came out of the bushes and cried from afar. He meant well in warning the young man, but was also afraid that he might alert the crocodiles that he wanted to hunt. This young man looked very tired and seriously injured. If he drank from the pond without knowing the crocodiles were there, he could have gotten killed by the iron-toothed crocodiles hiding under the water. The young man saw Hansen and became ecstatic. "What is this place and how do I get to Glory Shelter?" he asked. Staring at Hanum Glory Shelter, Hansen hesitated, looking at the young man's. "Strangely, we are in Teki Mountains north of Steel Armor Shelter, and I do not know where the Glory Shelter you mentioned is. I have come so far that I'm now in the territory of another shelter." The young man whispered to himself, looked up at Hansen and said, with an almost commanding tone, "Take me to the shelter." Hansen frowned as the tone of the young man wasn't very polite. Quietly, he said, "You go south from here. If you don't walk too slowly, you can reach the shelter before dark. I have to hunt, so I can't accompany you." Hansen was preparing to go back into the grass, not expecting the young man to suddenly hit him in the back, losing balance and falling to the ground. Hansen knocked his head on a rock and started to bleed. "What are you doing?" Hansen covered his wound and stood up, glaring at the young man. "All I want is obedience, not bulls. Take me to the shelter." The young man looked at Hansen coldly. Hansen summoned his bronze crescent spear and poked it at him. "Rubbish. Basic spear skills taught an integrated compulsory education. Even though my beast souls were all ruined on the way here, scum like you can't compare to me." The young man looked at Handan, contemptuously raised one palm and slashed it at Handan's spear. The young man's hands looked nothing like hands of a man, but rather like they were sculpted out of a whole piece of white jade, giving off an incredible sheen. The beast. Soul spear was cut in half by his palm as easily as a steel knife cutting through wood. Hypergen art with only half of the spear in his hand. Hansen was horrified. Science technology were of no use in God's sanctuary, but ancient martial arts played an unexpectedly important role. With all the geno points gained, humans were able to perform some mythical ancient martial arts in the real world. Nonetheless, it wasn't the so-called Kai, but the power of genes that powered the ancient martial arts. Hyper-geno arts were deeply rooted in ancient martial arts, full of mysteries that couldn't be explained by science. Their practice methods were mostly monopolized by the upper class. The most advanced hypergen arts were the least accessible for those who graduated from a public school of integrated compulsory education. Like Handen, hypergen arts were never an option. This is your last chance, lead the way or die again. He raised the jade-like palm, as if he was an executioner about to perform his duty. If Hansen didn't comply, he would cut his head off, kiss my ass. Hansen summoned the black beetle armor and covered himself, kicking the young man with a leg sweep. You asked for it. The young man's face darkened, his jade-like palm chopping towards Sen's leg flank. Hansen's leg was knocked away and there was a white mark on the golden armor. The young man was also forced to step back from Sen's kick. Surprised he looked greedily at Sen's armor. Must be sacred blood beast soul armor. Then a scum like you having such a nice thing is just a gift sent from heaven. Hand over your armor and I'll spare your life. Handen turned around and launched another kick in rage. The young man grabbed Hansen's leg and twisted it, wrestled him down and came down hard on his back with a knee. Oh! Hansen uttered a scream, feeling his spine about to break. Scum is always scum, even with a sacred blood be soul. The young man continuously hit Handen on the back of head, knocking his head into a rock. He cried, ferociously, surrender, the sacred blood be soul. It's not meant for scum like you asshole. Hansen's blood was burning. He suddenly raised his head and butted Zhu Longgen's face with his helmet. Blood splashed from Zhu Long's nose. He covered his nose and backed off. Hansen regained freedom and immediately summoned the Bloody Slayer. The moment he turned into the monstrous figure, he threw himself at Zhu Longgen. Zhu Longgen kept chopping at Hansen while Hansen ignored all the attacks from his tough hands and held him down tightly. The cow-shaped head knocking on his head. Who is scum? Who the F-K is? Scum. Hansen knocked madly on Zhu Longgen's head over and over again. While Zhu Longgen was struggling to kick Hansen, the latter ignored him and rammed his face with the cow head. It didn't take long before Zhu Longgen's body went limp. When Hansen finally calmed down, he was already dead with his face smashed in like a hunk of meat with the body of a bloody slayer and sacred blood beast soul armor. Even those who practiced hypergenal arts couldn't resist such brutal impact. Hansen let go of the body and Zhu Longgen fell to the floor like a pool of mud. Having dismissed the beast souls, Hansen felt a severe pain. It was hurting so much in a few spots that it felt like his bones were broken. Hansen dreaded to think what could have happened. He was injured so badly. Even with the shapeshifting and armor, Zhu Longgen's hypergeno art was really quite something. If he had the same beast souls, Hansen wouldn't be a match for him. Looking at the dead body, Hansen hesitated and then searched the body. There was a wallet with no cash but several crystal credit cards in it. Deluxe ones with high credit lines. He also found a memory chip. After some thought, Hansen destroyed the wallet and credit cards and threw them along with the dead body into the deep pond while keeping the memory chip. Several iron-toothed crocodiles emerged from the water and snapped at the dead body. Soon even the bones were gone. Hansen was relieved and turned away, too injured to keep hunting. Hansen returned to steel armor. Shelter enduring the pain. The gang of Son of Heaven were still looking for Dollar and the bounty had been raised. Unfortunately, no one had any inter with Hansen, so no one would know. Dollar was actually asked. Freak people were still talking about Dollar on the streets. Hansen went all the way back to his room and checked out the copper tooth beast, which had turned bronze in most parts. Although the shade was still lighter than a true mutant copper-tooth beast, it probably would take more time for the evolution to complete. Hansen closed the door and inserted the memory chip into a smart gadget, trying to find out Zhu's identity, able to cross the mountains and swamps to reach steel armor, shelter, and having practiced a hypergen art that looked very advanced. Zhu Longgen would be a formidable opponent if he still had his beast souls with him and had not been injured. The smart gadget displayed the contents of the memory chip and Hansen only had to look for a while before he became wild with joy. Hypergeneral arts. It's a tutorial for general arts. Hansen almost laughed out loud. The hologram stored in the chip was a naked woman making odd movements while reciting a cane in contagions with each movement. She would also give some explanation. Although the woman was extremely beautiful, Hansen was completely attracted to what she was talking about and had no other thoughts. Jade's skin. Isn't this the hypogenome art used by Zhu Longgen? Hansen had seen the power of Jade's skin when Zhu Longgen used it and became even more happy. Having locked himself in the room for 48 hours, Hansen finally memorized everything in the chip and destroyed it as it could become a pitfall in the future. After watching the Jade's skin tutorial, Hansen had a stronger sense that Zhu Longan must have been somebody significant. Hansen began to practice Jade's skin as he was recovering. He had thought before about buying a tutorial of a gen art after he had earned some money. However, the ones that could be bought were all cheap. Unlike Jade's skin, which he could tell was premium. Knowing that practicing Jade's skin might eventually expose him, Hansen still decided to begin. If he missed Jade's skin, he might never have the opportunity to practice a premium hypergenome art. Having practiced for several days, Hansen felt his body had become cooler and his body temperature was indeed 35 degrees Fahrenheit, lower than normal. It was not a discomfort, but rather a refreshing feeling. Hansen felt more fit as if his body cells were full of energy. His body temperature didn't change. Further, as he kept on practicing, Hansen became more and more fit and his skin more and more smooth. "Hansen, what have you been up to lately? It's been a while since we met. Let's hang out sometime." The hologram of a smiling, handsome long-haired man about Hansen's age popped out from the clink. "Where are we going?" Hansen was delighted to see Jang Ang, the long-haired guy. They grew up together and he was son of Mr. Yang. "The lawyer come out first. Han Hao and Zai are also with me and we are almost there." Jang Dean said. "Sure." Hansen nodded and went out the door. Hansen got in and saw a girl and a guy talking in the back seats. The girl named Zai was very pretty and gentle and the guy was Han Hao, son of Hansen's fat aunt. Hansen's aunt was an aggressive woman. So Han Hao inherited her family named Han. Hao took a look at him and continued to talk to Ziza, ignoring Han and Ziza. "You should see it." Dollar just waved his hand and turned into a monster with horse legs, a human upper body, and a cow head in golden armor. Son of Heaven and his gang could do nothing but watch him gallop away. Hansen was somewhat surprised to see Han Hao sputtering on. He did not know Han Hao was also randomly sent to the steel armor shelter. Hanao was 3 months younger than him, so he should have just had his birthday and gained access to God's sanctuary for unknown reasons. If those under 16 were teleported, their bodies would suffer irreversible damage. So according to the Alliance laws, one must be 16 years old to be teleported to God's sanctuary regardless of social status. "Hey Frenzy, where are we going?" Hansen asked Jang Ing. Although Jang Ing was a good-looking man, he became crazy whenever he was in a fight. Hence the nickname Jang Ding's face lit up. Starlight Martial Hall, my idol. Tang gently used going to be in an exhibition fight held there. He was the chosen last year and his broadsword skills are so fierce. Jang Den Fang was full of yearning in this era where everyone was focused on evolution. Stars no longer came from acting, singing, sports and esports, but from fighting in God's sanctuary once every year. The martial hall of each shelter would open at the same time and those in the top 100 could have their names on the martial stele in the martial hall. The champions from each shelter would be eligible to compete among themselves, and the same happened in all 4 phases of God's sanctuary. The top 10 from each phase could have their names on the sacred stele, which was public to everyone in the same phase and gained the title. The chosen and the 10 chosen would become the hottest stars of the year. In recent years, King Sheen had always been the champion of steel armor shelter, but her name was never on the sacred stele, so she was never among the top 10 of one God's sanctuary, ranking number 5. Last year, Tang Ji Lu was known for his fierce broadsword skills. He was very popular among young people and even more well-liked than the top 4. He was paid as high as 10 million Levo dollars for any exhibition match. Knowing his popularity, Hansen was nevertheless shocked when he saw a full house at Starlight Martial Hall, which could accommodate more than 100,000 people. Many crazy fans were holding signs and calling out Tang Gently Yu's name. When he appeared, a girl was so excited that she fainted. "If I could have my name on the sacred stele like Tang Li once in my life, then I'd know I've lived," Jang Di said, admiringly. "You will." Frenzy Hansen smiled and said, watching the young people around him going crazy for Tang Ji Lu's appearance, "You've gained a mutant beast soul already. Tell the truth. Did you hunt it or pay for it?" Jang Ding cried, staring at Han Hao. "Of course I hunted it myself," Hanao said loudly. Hansen laughed to himself since he was a kid. Hanao had always raised his voice. When he lied, his parents probably bought him the mutant beast soul. With an enormous amount of money, the cheapest mutant beast soul would cost millions and good ones, tens of millions. So that's why his relatives were after the old house. It was a huge expense for them. Although the company had earned a lot of money, they had probably spent it all by now. Tang Li was indeed awesome, although it was just an exhibition fight. His broad sword skills were so swift and fierce that his broad sword almost became invisible. After watching for a while, Hansen knew that Tang Ji-lu must have practiced premium hyper-geno arts and learned his weapon skills from masters, and he was no competition to Tang Ji-lu. Tang Ji-lu won the fight and summoned a beast soul to perform shapeshifting into a 3-meter-tall tear in Aosa creature and smashing a huge stone with its head, arousing a burst of screaming sacred blood. Beast soul of raging Dementor. I would do anything for a beast soul like this. Zhang Difang stared at Tang Zhenyu, who turned into a monster with a watering mouth. This is nothing. This beast soul is nothing like the $1. As Han Hao sputtered about dollar as if it were himself. It would take a showdown to tell Tang Glai was Dan Fang's idol. So he was upset to hear that. I don't know how good dollar was, but his sacred blood beast soul was robbed from others, and it was not a chivalric act. Even if he had a great beast soul, he would not be comparable to Ji Lu. Han Sen blushed with shame and thought, oh, frenzy, you didn't know what a hard time I was having. How could I let go of an opportunity like that? Not to mention Son of Heaven was my enemy. Hansen was hesitating whether or not to tell them that dollar was himself, but decided not to. It wouldn't do them any good. After all, Hansen kept practicing Jade's skin and recovering. After he returned home every 2 days, he went to God's sanctuary to check on the copper-tooth beast. It took the beast half a month from the time it swallowed the black crystal to become a mutant creature, but it was still the size of an ordinary copper-tooth beast. While the mutant copper-tooth beast Hansen had seen were twice its size. In addition to the size, the one he evolved into wasn't much stronger either. Not even close to a true mutant one. Hansen took out his alloy dagger and slashed the beast on the neck, but caused no damage at all. It was his dagger that chipped. So it is somewhat different from an ordinary one-hand, send shapeshift into a bloody slayer and snapped its neck by force. Mutant copper-tooth beast killed no beast. Soul gained eat its flesh to gain 0 to 10 mutant geno points. The sound in his mind overjoyed Hans sent it might look different than a wild mutant copper-tooth beast, but it was fine as long as it was indeed a mutant creature. Zyo Cow was depressed these days. King Shu and asked him to find dollar, but he didn't know dollar any more than she did. So what was he supposed to do? Early in the morning, Zyo Cow was tripped by something and fell flat on his face. Who is this F-Hashker that placed a stone in front of my room? He's dead. If I find out even more depressed than before. Zio Sao saw that there was something under the stone. He took a closer look and found a note in a bundle. The note said, goods worth 50,000 delivered. We're square. If you want more, come to Zephyr Valley tomorrow. Cash only. Although there was no signature, a coin was drawn at the lower left corner making clear who it was from. Zyo Sao was thrilled but didn't make a sound this time, looking around and seeing no one. He took the bundle and note and closed the door. Zyo Sao carefully opened the bundle and saw a long strip of meat jerky the size of 2 or 3 bites. Zyo chewed up the meat jerky and swallowed mutant copper-tooth beast flesh. Eaten 1 mutant geno point gained the voice in his mind. Surprise, Zyo Cow mutant copper-tooth beast flesh, so it was hunted by dollar. He must have more now that he asked me to bring cash to Zephyr Valley. Thinking of this, he got even more excited that he could bring Kingman's message to dollar and buy a mutant flesh from him. At the same time, early in the morning, Zyoca set off to Zephyr Valley. He waited from early morning to noon but didn't see dollar coming as #T. He must have fooled me. Zyoca was so upset that he was preparing to leave, but then heard someone say you brought cash. Shocked Zy. Sao turned around and saw dollar in golden armor emerging from below the ground. Brother, did you hide there all morning? Zy Sao said, staring at Hannon. I've been hiding here since last night. You know what's going on right now and I have to be careful. Hansen said casually, I admire you dollar, but you really have nothing to worry about. I'm so grateful you would sell me mutant flesh and would never betray you. Suzanne Wu gave Hansen the thumbs up. It was incredible that he could stay underground for the whole night and entire morning. It must have been so uncomfortable. Cut the crap. Did you bring the money? Hansen pulled out another bundle from the pit where he was hiding and placed it in front of Zi Sao. Zi Sao looked inside the bundle, which was full of the same meat jerky he had eaten yesterday. There must have been more than 5 pounds of it. He excitedly asked dollar, did you make all this from the mutant copper-tooth beast? Yep. An entire mutant copper-tooth beast is right here. 2 million and no bargaining, Hansen said. Well, 2 million is fine. Suzy Ole handed 2 stacks of 10,000 notes to Hansen, but doubted whether the entire beast was really there as there should have been more meat. Hansen noticed his doubt, took the money and said this meat jerky is made in traditional ways so it shrank a bit. Rest assured that the whole beast is here. Hansen made the copper-tooth beast into meat jerky so that no one would wonder why the beast was so tiny. Of course, I trust you. Zyo paused and said, Dollar, you should know that I work for Chuan. She has a message for you. She wants to buy the sacred blood beast soul and golden acts you gained the other day, and she could offer you a good price. Oh, what is the price? Hansen was interested in selling the golden axe as it was not that portable. He hadn't found a chance to use it, so it was still buried. You will have to figure this out yourselves and just the messenger. Zyo Cow shrugged and said, if you meet with King Chuan, tell her if she really wants to buy it, she can name a price and you can bring it to me. Han Sen said lightly. It was too risky for her to meet. Ken Chuan Hansen took back the beast's soul armor and returned to steel armor shelter. When he was entering the gate, he met an acquaintance. Senator Hanao was surprised to see him. Han How you know as Freak Hanao companions all recognized Hansen and looked at Hanao. Strangely, no wrong guy, let's go. Hanao paused and looked embarrassed. Without saying hello, he walked past Hansen. Hanao hadn't expected Hansen to be in the same shelter, nor that he was also the infamous ass freak. If word got out that he was Hansen's cousin, Hanao couldn't imagine what Son of Heaven and King Chuan would do to him. Hansen smiled wryly and did not expose Han Hao's lie. Since Hanao didn't want anything to do with him, why would he do his cousin any harm? With 2 million on him, Hansen left God's sanctuary and went back home. He asked Mr. Zhang to help with the legal procedures regarding the old house to avoid any further disputes with his relatives. After that, Hansen felt a lot more relaxed. Everything would be taken care of and life would only get better when he earned more money. Hanian could go to a private school where she could get a much better education than he did. In some elite schools, she could even learn hypergen arts and have a much better start to enter an elite school. However, her family must be aristocratic, so Hansen must complete one evolution and gain the title. That would be a piece of cake for me. I could even have the title of Sacred Blood Aristocrat if I want. Send left steel armor shelter and went all the way into the mountains. He didn't plan to hunt copper-tooth s'more as he had had enough of their meat and would no longer gain primitive geno points from it. It was another primitive creature that he was going after. He could eat several and also bring back a living one to evolve. Hansen had chosen a place called Beath from Cave for hunting. This time it was a remote cave in the mountains where primitive creatures quartz scorpions lived because it was so dark and narrow and bare from cave. Even with lighting equipment, sometimes it was still difficult to see quartz scorpions hidden in rock tunnels. If stung by these scorpions, it would take a mere 3 to 5 minutes before someone who had maxed out on primitive geno points would be poisoned to death. Therefore, few people would choose quartz scorpions as their targets with black beetle armor. However, Hansen wasn't risking much as it was not likely that quartz scorpions could get to him. His chose quartz scorpions because first it was easy to hide himself from the public in the cave, and second, a quartz scorpion was only the size of a fist, so it would be easy for him to carry their bodies back, unlike the large prey which were hard to transport. Third, if he happened to gain the beast soul of a quartz scorpion, he would also make a fortune as it was a weapon like a military knife, which was poisoned and incredibly sharp as a primitive beast soul. Its price was almost as high as a mutant one at the mouth of the cave. Hansen made sure he was alone and summoned his armor. Entering Both from cave prepared as modern lighting equipment didn't work in God's sanctuary, Hansen brought a self-made torch with which he could only see several feet in front of him. With mica and the rocks reflecting the light, he could hardly see the hidden scorpion's flank. Hansen soon felt a hit on his foot. He looked down and saw a deep blue scorpion the size of his fist stinging him on the feet with its tail. Fortunately, Hansen's feet were also wrapped in armor and the scorpion tail couldn't hurt him at all. Hansen stepped on the quartz scorpion and crushed it. Protected by the black beetle armor, Hansen killed all quartz scorpions he saw on the way. Hansen heard the other name he had given himself when he was on a spree. Shocked, he peered in the direction where the voice came from. In the cave sat a woman in her 20s leaning against stalagmites, looking at him. Surprised King Chuan, Hansen exclaimed, not expecting to see this woman here. Hansen turned around to run since he had stabbed her in the rear. He had had nightmares about it. Don't go. I don't care about the grudge between you and Son of Heaven, and even if I wanted to look for trouble, I wouldn't be able to. King Chuan quickly said. Hansen paused and looked back at King Chuan, whose ankle was swollen and badly bruised. Clearly she had been stung by a quartz scorpion. It suddenly hit hand. Send that King Sen must have so many treasures on her since she had been in steel armor shelter for years and wished to evolve with the maximum sacred geno points. She must have sacred blood, beast souls, and very many mutant beast souls. At this point, she was injured and it looked quite serious. She had so many geno points that the scorpion poison might not kill her, but her ability to fight surely had suffered, or at least she couldn't move her injured leg. Although I was the one who stabbed her, she hit me back right away and has been ruthless to me ever since. If I could blackmail her right now, that would be some compensation for my suffering these months. Hansen thought, leering at King Chuan as if she could see through him. King Chuan summoned a beast soul in the shape of a purple butterfly, which turned into a purple dagger in her hand. "You know the name of this dagger?" King Chu and asked him with a smile. I don't. Hansen noticed the gleam of the dagger, but she couldn't have summoned it for its beauty. It must be at least a mutant beast soul, and even possibly a sacred blood beast soul. This dagger is the beast soul of a malicious butterfly, and it is in venom with strong poison. You decide if your armor could block my dagger. King Chuan was still smiling. King Chuan couldn't see Hansen blushing because his armor blocked his face. You worry too much. We just met and have no hard feelings between us whatsoever. Why would I try to hurt you? The sacred blood armor might not have been able to block the sacred blood dagger. Hansen would not take the chance. Besides, they weren't really enemies either, as King Chuan didn't do anything more than make a few threats. It was Son of Heaven and his gang that really bullied him. King Chuan smiled and took back her dagger. I can't move. If you can take me out of the cave safely, I will pay you a generous reward. How come you came here alone? Hansen asked, not agreeing straight away. He was curious how King Chuan was able to come this far when there was no trace of quartz scorpions being hunted on the way. Originally I wanted to kill a mutant quartz scorpion, but it was more cunning than I thought. It started to attack me, leading other scorpions when my incense was about to burn out, so that I couldn't leave the cave. The primitive scorpions no longer feared me. When the incense was gone, I was able to fight them off, but was stung by a mutant quartz scorpion. So now it's even less likely that I can leave here. King Chuan looked at Hansen and said, didn't you barter with Zyo Sao for money? Take me out and I'll offer you that. You were stung by a mutant quartz scorpion? Hansen looked at her horrified. If it was just a sting by a primitive quartz scorpion, I wouldn't have asked for help. King Chuan said casually. Hansen now knew it was incense that kept the quartz scorpion sway from King Chuan, and she thought that he must have used the same method. What she didn't know was that he had killed all quartz scorpions on the way out. If she had known, she would have walked away herself. Did you not kill the mutant scorpion? Hansen asked again. Yes, but I did not get a beast soul. No one could get the fleshy either, as it's full of scorpions out there. King Chuan said, I'll take you not for money, but for a mutant beast soul. You are too greedy. King Chuan glanced at him. Miskin for you, a mutant beast soul is nothing. Is your life not worth it? Hansen said. All right then. King Chuan looked at Hansen earnestly. Amazing. You have a deal. Ms. Hansen walked farther into the cave. Chapter 18, Mutant Creature. What are you doing, King? Shu and frowned. I'll take you out. After picking up the corpse of the mutant quartz scorpion you killed, Hansen continued to go inside. There are so many scorpions there, don't you need incense? King Chuan looked at Hansen puzzled. Why do men need incense? Hansen came back with a giant blue scorpion about a foot long in his hand. King Chuan sighed after looking him up and down. I was tricked by you. You have already killed all the quartz scorpions out there, haven't you? Smart girl. Hansen poured the dead scorpions from his bag, which soon piled into a heap. Although King Chuan had guessed it, she was still surprised to see that Hansen had killed so many scorpions. Hansen put the corpse of the mutant scorpion in his bag first before he started to fill it with primitive scorpions. There were still a few that wouldn't fit in there, and he didn't waste those. Bon ate all the flesh until he had cleaned them up. Primitive quartz scorpion flesh eaten for primitive geno points gained. I haven't seen anyone quite like you willing to eat such disgusting things. King Sen had never met someone who had such nice equipment but remained so stingy. Come on. Han Sen squatted next to King Chuan, wanting to carry her out on his back, since there are no scorpions anymore. I could just walk out. King Sen said, you have promised me a mutant beast soul and couldn't take that back anyway. Why not enjoy my service with your injured leg? Hansen said, you are right. Why not? She bit her bottom lip, got up and carefully climbed onto the back of Hansen, but the armor Hansen couldn't really enjoy the feeling of her body against his. He walked out carrying Chuan with his bag. In one hand, she only weighed about 100 pounds, which was nothing for Hansen, who had already gained quite a lot, geno points. They emerged from the cave in no time. Where are you going? Asked Hansen. Back to the shelter. King Chuan said. Hansen no longer spoke and carried her towards steel armor. Shelter. After an hour he let her down. It is not too far away from the shelter now, and people pass by here all the time. Wait for a while and then ask them to bring you back. Hansen extended an empty hand to King Chuan. Now my mutant beast soul. I have asked Suzanne O'Cow to send a message. Would you sell me the sacred blood beast, soul and gear? King Chuan didn't hesitate before she handed over a mutant beast soul in the shape of a black cat to Hand Set. What is your offer for the golden double-edged axe? Hand Set asked. 2 million. That is a piece of sacred blood gear, while 2 million won't even get you a mutant beast soul. Hands. Sin frowned. Sacred blood gear is very nice, but you can't take it to the real world. While beast souls could be used outside God's sanctuary, that explains the price. If you would sell a sacred blood beast soul, I'd give you 20 million. Explained King Chuan. A mutant beast soul plus 2 million. Hansen said a mutant beast soul is out of the question. I'll give you 5 million flesh of 2 mutant creatures and 2 million. You are asking too much. Final offer. 6 million. After all, you can't take it outside. King Chuan said. Okay, get the money ready. I will tell Zekia when and where we trade. Hansen said and left with his bag. You really would not consider selling the sacred blood beast soul? 20 million is just a tentative offer, we could discuss further. King Chuan said to his back. No way. Hansen left without pausing. King Chuan looked at him leaving and thought his armor was tougher than the Qua Scorpion sting. It must also be a sacred blood beast soul. Who was he? He doesn't look like a soldier. She had no clue. Hansen went back to his original look and returned to the shelter with his bag. There was no one guarding the gate anymore. They had searched for Dollar for so long and found nothing, so they had to give up. Coincidentally, Hansen ran into Han. How and his friends again. Nice to see you again. Ask Freak. You have a full bag with you. How many mutant creatures did you hunt? A young man ridiculed him. One. Hansen replied calmly. Haha, you are funny. Could you even hunt primitive creatures? It must be full of black beetles. They laughed, the young man leading everyone to burst into laughter. No one believed Hansen could get a mutant creature. Han Hao. Don't mistake him for anyone. If you knew him, you'd forever have bad luck. A young man patted Han Hao on the shoulder. No way. I had no ass. Freak. Han Hao looked embarrassed. Hansen ignored them and carried his bag back to his room. He saved the mutant quartz scorpion and was going to sell Zio Sao all the rest. Although he could evolve a creature into a mutant one in half a month with the black crystal, he'd rather use the crystal to get sacred blood creatures. In the middle of the night, Hansen placed a bag of dead quartz scorpions and a note at the door of S.O. Cow's room before knocking a few times. Then he hid in an alley close by and made sure his eyesight took the bag and note inside. It turned out to be a nice collaboration, and Hansen got the 6 million promised by Chuan and another 80,000 for the scorpions. He went back to his room with boxes of cash and almost jumped with joy. Even when his father was still alive, he had never seen so much money at once. Han Sen left God's sanctuary with the money since. The only thing he wanted to do right now was to share the joy with his mother and sister. Their adversity had finally ended. The 2 million he earned before was all used on solving the issue of the old house, and he could eventually have the 6 million to himself, which was a totally different feeling. Although the money was not even enough for the rich to buy a luxury aeroplane for Hannon, it was already the most money he had seen in his life. Mom Yen, I have something to show you. Hansen pulled them into his room and poured the cash onto his bed. Where did you get so much money? Lu Oslin was first frightened instead of being surprised, fearing that her son might have done something dangerous. Mom, I was lucky to have killed a mutant creature and gained the beast soul, so I traded it for this money. Hansen did not dare to tell the truth. Afraid that Lasellen might get worried, he didn't dare to leak anything about the black crystal. As the precious stone may land its innocent possessor in jail, his whole family could be wiped out. If word got out, Lu Osellen said, Ruli Sen, you should not have sold it. It could be of great help to you and we could always get by Mom. No worries. I will have another chance. I've eaten the mutant flesh and gained mutant geno points in the future. It'll be much easier for me to hunt and everything will get better. But Lu Oslin still felt bad, as it was not that easy to kill a mutant creature for ordinary people. It would be great luck to hunt one, just like winning the lottery, so there may never be a second time. Ian is about to start school and I'm not letting her to go to a public one like I did. Hansen said. Lu Oslin looked at her children with tears in her eyes. It's all my fault. I didn't take good care of you, Mom. You are a great woman and you are the one who raised us. Let me contribute a little as well. Hansen picked up Han Yan Yen. Let's go out to eat. You can have whatever you want today. Ian's face lit up. I want to eat sapphire ice cream. Sure, let's go have sapphire ice cream. Hansen pinched Handan. Small nose sapphire ice cream is too expensive. You don't need to splurge with the money. Save it to buy some meat. Just once Hansen went out holding Sen's hand. Don't tell others you have hunted a mutant creature where you sold a mutant beast sold. I don't want anything bad to happen to you, Lu urged her son. Since Hansen's father had the accident, Lu Selen had changed. She no longer wanted Hansen to be in charge, but just to be safe. Mom, relax. I will not say a thing. You keep the money and decide what to do with it. Hansen went out of the house holding his sister with one hand and his mother with the other. Sapphire ice cream was famous throughout the alliance and was also very expensive. Even the cheapest type cost more than 10,000. Their neighbors' kids were always having sapphire ice cream, and Hansen also had tried it a few times when he was younger. However, when Ian was born, they were already bankrupt, so they couldn't afford such luxuries anymore. Having the impression that the ice cream was delicious, Hansen could no longer remember what it tasted like. When the three came to Sapphire, all the seats were taken and there was a long line to buy ice cream. Let's go upstairs. Before Hansen entered the store, he saw through the window that the second floor was almost empty. So he thought the ladies could go upstairs and have a seat while he would stand in line alone at the stairs. He was stopped by a waiter. I am sorry, you cannot go up. The waiter said, why aren't there any seats upstairs? Hansen frowned, contemptuous, and impatient. The waiter pointed to a notice on the wall. You should have heard about our rule even if you have never had our ice cream before. Hansen looked at the notice, which said the distinguished and aristocrats only, and understood what he was referring to. So the second floor was an area exclusively for people with privileges and ordinary people weren't even allowed to enter. No wonder the second floor had much better decorations, yet was so empty. We don't need to sit down, we'll just wait here and you go get ice cream, said Lewin. Trying to spare Hansen and going, Hansen smiled and went to the back of the line. He seemed to be indifferent, but was suddenly possessed by an aspiration. What's so special about the distinguished and aristocrats? Soon I shall have it all and more. The stupid notice will never get in my way again. There still were no empty seats when it was his turn to buy the ice cream. So Hansen had to order takeout before leaving. He took another look at the notice. The distinguished and aristocrats only. That will be all for now. I hope you find this story interesting. Leave a like, subscribe, and enable notifications so you won't miss the next part of this story. Have a wonderful day. Goodbye.